The pre-dawn darkness blanketed the military training camp as Kofi Ademola, along with dozens of other fresh recruits, stood at attention in the central parade ground. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of the African savanna mixed with the metallic tang of nearby equipment. This was day one of their transformation from civilians into soldiers. A booming voice cut through the silence. "Welcome to hell, recruits." The speaker, a barrel-chested man with a face etched by years of service, paced before them. This was Sergeant Major Okonkwo, the man who would shape their lives for the next 12 weeks. You may have thought you were tough in your villages and towns, but here, you are nothing. We will break you down and build you back up as soldiers of this great nation. The intensity of the Sergeant Major's words sent a shiver down Kofi's spine. He stood straighter, determined to prove himself worthy of the challenge. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, the recruits were divided into platoons. Kofi found himself assigned to Rhino Platoon, a group of 30 men and women from various parts of the country. Among them was Zaki, the boastful young man Kofi had noticed at the recruitment center, and Amara, the petite but determined woman who had faced skepticism from others. The first week was a blur of activity. Every morning began with a grueling physical training session. Kofi's muscles screamed in protest as they ran laps around the camp, did countless push-ups, and navigated obstacle courses under the unforgiving African sun. The farm work that had once seemed challenging now felt like child's play compared to this. Classroom sessions filled their afternoons. They learned about military structure, protocol, and the history of their nation's armed forces. Kofi absorbed every detail, fascinated by the stories of past conflicts and peacekeeping missions. He began to understand the weight of the uniform he now wore. Nights were spent in the barracks, a sparse room filled with bunk beds. As Kofi lay on his thin mattress each night, muscles aching, mind reeling from the day's lessons, he could hear the muffled sobs of homesick recruits. He too felt the pangs of missing home, but he clung to his sense of purpose, remembering the proud faces of his family and villagers as he had left. As the weeks progressed, the training intensified. They were introduced to weapons, learning to assemble, disassemble, and fire various firearms. The crack of gunshots became a constant backdrop to their days. Kofi found he had a natural talent for marksmanship, earning rare words of praise from the ever-stern Sergeant Major Okonkwo. But it wasn't all about physical prowess and weapons handling. The recruits were also taught the importance of teamwork and trust. One particularly challenging exercise involved navigating a high ropes course blindfolded, relying solely on the instructions of their teammates. Kofi was paired with Amara, the small woman he had noticed on the first day. Despite her size, her voice was steady and confident as she guided him across the perilous ropes. When it was her turn, Kofi returned the favor, marveling at the trust they had developed in such a short time. The training was designed to push them to their limits, both physically and mentally. There were times when Kofi wanted to give up, when his body screamed for rest and his mind longed for the simplicity of his old life. One particularly grueling day, after a 20-kilometer march in full gear under the scorching sun, Kofi found himself questioning his decision to enlist. As he sat alone that evening, staring at his blistered feet, Zaki approached him. The once boastful recruit had been humbled by the rigors of training, and a camaraderie had formed between them. "Thinking of home?" Zaki asked, sitting beside Kofi. Kofi nodded. "I never imagined it would be this hard," he admitted. Zaki smiled wryly. "Me neither. But look how far we've come. We're not the same people who arrived here weeks ago." His words struck a chord with Kofi. He realized that beneath the aches and exhaustion, he had grown stronger, more disciplined, more confident. He was becoming the soldier he had dreamed of being. As they entered the final weeks of basic training, the recruits faced their greatest challenge yet, a 5-day field exercise designed to test everything they had learned. They were dropped off in a remote area of the savannah, given minimal supplies, and tasked with completing a series of objectives while evading a group of senior soldiers playing the role of enemy combatants. The days were long and the nights were cold. Kofi and his team navigated using maps and compasses, set up ambushes, and practiced battlefield first aid on simulated casualties. They subsisted on field rations and what little they could forage, always on the alert for the enemy. On the 4th night, as Kofi took his turn on watch, the silence of the savannah was broken by a low, rumbling growl. His heart raced as he realized a lion was nearby. The training scenarios hadn't prepared them for this. Kofi quietly woke his teammates, and they formed a tight circle, weapons at the ready. For tense hours, they maintained their vigil, the unseen predator a stark reminder of the real dangers they might face in their future deployments. As dawn broke and the lion's presence faded, Kofi felt a profound shift within himself. He had faced a primal fear and stood his ground, not just for himself but for his comrades. This, he realized, was the essence of being a soldier. The field exercise culminated in a simulated assault on an enemy position. Rhino platoon moved as one, applying all they had learned over the past weeks. Kofi found himself taking a leadership role, coordinating their movements and directing their fire. When it was over, even the senior soldiers playing the opposition nodded in approval at their performance. As they marched back to camp on the final day, exhausted but triumphant, Kofi reflected on his journey. The boy who had left his village seemed a lifetime away. In his place stood a man, a soldier, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The graduation ceremony was a day of immense pride. As Kofi stood at attention, listening to the commander's speech about duty, honor, and sacrifice, he felt a swell of emotion. He thought of his family back in Mawini, of old man Tafari and his words of advice, of the drought-stricken fields and the hopes he carried for his community. When it was his turn to receive his badge, Kofi marched forward with confidence. Sergeant Major Okonkwo, the man who had pushed them to their limits and beyond, pinned the badge on Kofi's chest. For a brief moment, the stern facade cracked, and Okonkwo offered a small smile. "You've done well, Ademola," he said quietly. "Remember everything you've learned here. It will keep you and your comrades alive." As the ceremony concluded and the new soldiers celebrated with their families who had come to witness their achievement, Kofi stood apart for a moment. His family couldn't make the long journey, but he felt their presence in his heart. He looked out over the training grounds that had been his home for the past 12 weeks, the place where he had been broken down and rebuilt, where he had forged unbreakable bonds with his fellow soldiers. Kofi Ademola was no longer just a recruit. He was a soldier, ready to serve his country, protect his people, and face whatever challenges lay ahead. As he joined his comrades in celebration, he knew that this was not an end, but a beginning.